The rain fell in merciless sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each drop a tiny hammer against the fragile piece of the penthouse. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken words. Cassius, a man who built an empire from nothing, stood with his back to his pregnant wife, Aurelia, his silhouette a rigid line of defiance against the glittering, rain-streaked cityscape. He told her she was a weight, a relic of a past he no longer desired. As he cast her out into the stormy night, with nothing but the clothes on her back, he was blissfully unaware that the woman he deemed worthless was the secret heiress to a $50 million fortune, a sleeping giant of wealth that was about to awaken. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on modern wealth. Polished marble floors reflected the cold, recessed lighting and abstract art, chosen by an interior designer for its investment value rather than its soul, adorned the stark white walls. Every surface was pristine, every object in its designated place. It was a life curated for a magazine, and Aurelia often felt like just another one of its carefully placed ornaments. She would trace the veins in the Italian marble of the kitchen island, a surface that had never seen a fleck of flour or a splash of wine, and wonder when the silence had become the loudest sound in their home. Cassius was a man sculpted by ambition. His days were a whirlwind of board meetings, power lunches, and transatlantic flights. He moved with a restless energy, his phone a permanent extension of his hand. His mind always 3 steps ahead in a game of corporate chess Aurelia had never learned to play. When he was home, his presence was a ghost's, a rustle of papers in his study, the clink of ice in a whiskey glass, the low murmur of a late-night conference call. The chasm between them had not appeared overnight. It had been carved out slowly, millimeter by millimeter, with every missed dinner, every forgotten anniversary, every conversation that skimmed the surface of their lives without ever daring to plunge into the depths. Aurelia had tried. In the beginning, she had fought the encroaching silence. She would plan elaborate dinners that grew cold on the table, buy tickets to shows he was always too busy to attend, and wear dresses she knew he loved, only to have him walk past without a glance. She had been his rock when his first tech venture was nothing more than a dream operating out of a cramped garage. She had believed in him, celebrated his first million, and held him when the stress threatened to shatter him. But with every new level of success, he seemed to shed a piece of the man she had married, replacing it with a harder, more polished veneer. The warmth in his eyes was now often replaced by a flicker of calculation. Her pregnancy, which should have been a bridge to close the distance, had only widened it. When she had told him, her hands trembling with a mixture of hope and fear, he had managed a tight, fleeting smile. "A baby," he had said, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "An heir." It was not the joyful exclamation she had dreamed of, but a clinical assessment, as if their child was another asset to be added to his portfolio. He had hired the best doctors, a nutritionist, a prenatal yoga instructor, outsourcing the intimacy of their journey to a team of professionals. He would inquire about her health with the same detached concern he used for a quarterly earnings report, ticking a box before moving on to the next item on his agenda. One evening, the silence was particularly oppressive. Aurelia sat on the plush cream sofa, a book resting unread in her lap. The gentle swell of her belly, a constant, comforting presence. Cassius was in his study, the door firmly closed. She could hear the faint, melodic laugh of a woman from a video call he was on. It wasn't the first time. Lately, a name had been drifting through the periphery of their lives. Sylvie. A new hire, a brilliant marketing strategist, Cassius had explained. Young, ambitious, hungry. A mirror of what he used to be. He spoke of her with an energy Aurelia hadn't seen in him for years. A spark of admiration that felt like a betrayal. She thought back to her own past, a past Cassius knew little about. He saw her as simple, sweet, a beautiful and unassuming woman who was content to live in his shadow. He had no idea of the steel that lay dormant within her, forged in the fires of a difficult childhood. Her grandmother, a woman Aurelia remembered as eccentric and fiercely independent, had been disowned by the family for reasons no one ever spoke of. Aurelia had spent summers with her as a child in a sprawling, slightly dilapidated country house filled with books, dusty antiques, and the scent of wild roses. Her grandmother had taught her to be resilient, to trust her own judgment, and to understand that a woman's worth was not a reflection in a man's eyes, but a fire lit from within. Those lessons had been buried under years of trying to be the perfect, supportive wife, but the embers still glowed, waiting for a breath of air to reignite them. Cassius, in his arrogance, had never bothered to look deep enough to see them. He saw the quiet wife, not the quiet survivor. A log in the minimalist gas fireplace crackled, a sound that made her jump. Cassius finally emerged from his study, loosening his tie. He glanced at her, his eyes lingering for a moment on her belly before moving away, as if it were an obstacle. "I'm heading to London for a few days," he announced, not asked. "The Aegis deal is in a critical phase. Sylvie has some groundbreaking ideas." The casual mention of her name was a deliberate, calculated sting. Aurelia felt the familiar ache in her chest, a mix of jealousy and helplessness. "Cassius, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "We haven't really talked in weeks." He sighed, a sound of profound weariness that made her feel like a burden. "Aurelia, I'm managing a multi-million-dollar company. We can talk when I get back. Make sure you take your vitamins." He walked into their bedroom, and the sound of a suitcase being opened was the final, definitive word in their non-conversation. She remained on the sofa, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, a silent promise to the new life growing inside her. The gilded cage had never felt colder, its bars never more visible. She was a possession, a part of the perfect picture he presented to the world. But a storm was gathering, and she could feel the foundations of their carefully constructed life beginning to tremble. Cassius was so busy looking at the horizon, at his next conquest, that he failed to see the quiet, formidable force sitting right in his own home. He was about to make the biggest miscalculation of his life. The London trip stretched from a few days into a full week. Cassius's texts were brief, perfunctory updates that read more like corporate memos than messages to his pregnant wife. Meeting went well. Deal progressing. Delayed. There were no questions about her, no mention of the baby, no hint of affection. Each clipped message was another stone in the wall he was building between them. Aurelia found herself clinging to the memories of the man he once was. The man who would call her from a business trip just to say he missed the sound of her laughter. The man who saw her as his partner, not his dependent. Now she was just part of the domestic infrastructure he expected to run smoothly in his absence. Suspicion is a poison that seeps into the bloodstream, slow and insidious. It started with a photo tag on social media. A junior employee from the London office had posted a group picture from a celebratory dinner. There, at the head of the table, was Cassius, a broad, genuine smile on his face. A smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. Sitting beside him, leaning in so closely their shoulders touched, was Sylvie. She was vibrant and sharp, with intelligent eyes and a confident laugh that seemed to echo even in the still image. Cassius's hand rested on the back of her chair, a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a jolt of ice through Aurelia's veins. She fell down a rabbit hole of digital clues. Sylvie's public profile was a curated gallery of ambition, photos from industry conferences, inspirational quotes about breaking glass ceilings, and snapshots of a glamorous, work-centric life. There were pictures of her in London, taken the same week Cassius was there. A coffee cup on a hotel balcony that looked suspiciously like the one in the suite Cassius always booked. A reflection of a man's watch in the glass of a framed picture. A watch identical to the one Aurelia had given him for their 5th anniversary. Each discovery was a small, sharp cut, bleeding the hope out of her. The whispers she had been trying to ignore grew into a deafening roar in her mind. His late nights were no longer just about work. The scent of an unfamiliar, floral perfume that sometimes clung to his suit jacket was not just from a passing stranger. The second phone he claimed was for international business, was a secret line to a secret life. The lies weren't just spoken, they were lived, woven into the very fabric of their marriage. Haunted by her discoveries, Aurelia felt a familiar, cold dread creeping in, a ghost from her past. Her father had been a man of secrets too, a charming, successful man who had lived a double life, leaving her mother a hollowed-out shell of a woman when his betrayal was finally revealed. Aurelia had been a child, but she remembered the shattering of her world, the whispers of her mother's friends, the way her father became a forbidden name in their home. Her mother had become brittle, constantly afraid, teaching Aurelia that love was a fragile, dangerous thing, and that men, especially powerful men, could not be trusted. Aurelia had spent years fighting that inherited fear, believing Cassius was different. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust, to build a life with him. Now it felt as if her mother's painful legacy was her own destiny, a cycle she was doomed to repeat. When Cassius returned, he was distant, almost a stranger. He moved through the penthouse with a distracted air, the energy of his other life still clinging to him. He brought her a gift, a ridiculously expensive designer handbag, a classic Cassius gesture, a transaction meant to placate, to smooth over the cracks with a layer of gold. She looked at the bag, a symbol of the life he provided for her, and felt nothing but revulsion. "How was London?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, as he poured himself a whiskey. "Productive," he said, his back to her. "Sylvie is a genius. She single-handedly saved the Aegis deal. I'm promoting her. Head of European expansion." "She must have worked very hard," Aurelia said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She was testing him, giving him a chance, a rope to pull himself back from the edge. He turned, his eyes finally meeting hers, but they were cold, guarded. "She did. She's dedicated. She understands what it takes to succeed." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "Unlike you." The confrontation she had been rehearsing in her mind, the one where she calmly presented the evidence and demanded the truth, died on her lips. She saw the finality in his eyes. He wasn't just having an affair, he had already left her. His body was still in the penthouse, but his heart, his loyalty, his future, they were somewhere else, with someone else. The realization was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, devastating implosion, sucking all the air from her lungs. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked through the silent, cavernous apartment, her hand resting on her belly, the baby's gentle kicks a frantic Morse code message against her palm. She felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness, not just for her child, but for the younger version of herself who had been so broken by her father's betrayal. She would not let her own child grow up in a house built on lies. She would not become her mother, a woman slowly erased by a man's infidelity. She found herself in Cassius's home office. The room, like the rest of the apartment, was sterile and impersonal, except for one thing: a small frame photo on his desk. It was from their early years, taken on a shoestring budget vacation. They were both laughing, windswept and carefree, their arms wrapped around each other. The Cassius in the photo looked at the Aurelia in the photo with an adoration that made her heart ache. It was a relic from a forgotten time, a testament to a love that had been buried under the weight of ambition and ego. With a trembling hand, she picked up the frame. She wasn't just looking at a photo, she was looking at the full scope of her loss. The man she had loved was gone. The man who stood in his place was a stranger, and he was sleeping with another woman. The whispers had become a truth so loud it shook the very foundations of her world. The gilded cage was no longer just cold, it was a prison, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the door was about to be flung open, not as an escape, but as an eviction. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally broke, tearing through their lives with the force of a hurricane. It happened on a Tuesday, a day as mundane as any other, which only served to amplify the cruelty of it all. Aurelia had just returned from a doctor's appointment. The baby was healthy, strong, and active. She had felt a moment of pure, unadulterated joy listening to the steady, rhythmic thump of its heartbeat, a tiny drumbeat of hope in the cacophony of her fears. She walked into the penthouse to find Cassius standing by the window, not looking at the city, but at his own reflection in the rain-streaked glass. With him was Sylvie. She was perched on the arm of their sofa as if she owned it, her legs crossed, a smug, proprietary air about her. The sight of her in their home, in Aurelia's space, was a physical blow. The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. "Cassius?" Aurelia's voice was barely a whisper. The ultrasound photo she had been so excited to show him felt like a lead weight in her purse. He turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask of stone. There was no apology in his eyes, no flicker of remorse. There was only a cold, hard resolve. Aurelia, we need to talk. What is she doing here? Aurelia asked, her gaze fixed on Sylvie, who simply stared back, her expression a mixture of pity and triumph. Sylvie is here because she's part of my life now, Cassius said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. My future. The words hit her, each one a carefully aimed stone. Your future? Cassius, I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. Her voice trembled, the last vestiges of her composure beginning to crumble. She placed a hand on her belly, a desperate, instinctual gesture of protection. A mistake, Cassius said, and the cruelty of the words stole her breath. This whole thing, us, it's become a liability. You're not the wife a man in my position needs. You don't challenge me. You don't understand my world. You're content. And I can't have that. I need a partner, not a passenger. Every word was a confirmation of her deepest fears. She was an accessory he was now ready to discard, like an outdated watch or a last season suit. The years she had dedicated to him, the sacrifices she had made, the love she had given, it was all being reduced to a business liability. So you're throwing us away, she choked out, tears finally breaking free, hot and shameful on her cheeks. Your family, for her? Sylvie stood up, smoothing down her designer dress. It's not about you, Aurelia, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It's about synergy. Cassius and I have a dynamic that works. We elevate each other. You just anchor him. The audacity of the woman to stand in her home and dissect her marriage, to pass judgment on her worth, ignited a spark of fury in Aurelia's grief. You know nothing about us, she spat, her voice shaking with a rage she didn't know she possessed. I know enough, Cassius interjected, stepping between them, effectively shielding Sylvie from her. It was a small movement, but it was the most profound betrayal of all. He was protecting his mistress from his pregnant wife. I know that I can't do this anymore. I've made arrangements. My lawyer will be in contact with yours. My lawyer? I don't have a lawyer, Aurelia said, the practicalities of the situation crashing in on her, absurd and overwhelming. Then you should get one, he said dismissively. I want you to pack a bag. You need to leave. Tonight. The finality of his command was absolute. Leave? Cassius, where am I supposed to go? I'm 7 months pregnant. This is my home. It's my home, Aurelia, he corrected her, his voice like ice. Everything here is mine. You came into this marriage with nothing, and that's how you'll leave it. I'll provide a settlement, of course. Something adequate, but I want a clean break. He saw her as a charity case, a financial problem to be solved and dismissed. He had completely forgotten the woman who had worked 2 jobs to support them while he coded his first program. The woman who had sold her grandmother's locket, the only thing of value she had, to pay for a server he desperately needed. He had rewritten their history to fit his new narrative, casting himself as the self-made titan and her as the fortunate girl he had picked up along the way. Desperation clawed at her. Cassius, please, she begged, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching sorrow. Don't do this to our baby, your child. He looked at her stomach, and for the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. It wasn't love or even concern. It was annoyance. The baby was an inconvenient, messy loose end. The settlement will be more than enough for the child. Now I'm asking you one last time, pack your things and go. Sylvie watched the exchange, a silent, victorious queen surveying her new kingdom. The storm had broken, and Aurelia was the wreckage. Numbly, she walked into their bedroom, the room they had shared, the bed where their child was conceived. She moved as if in a trance, pulling a small suitcase from the closet. What do you pack for the end of your life? She grabbed a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the worn copy of a book her grandmother had given her. Her hands brushed against the jewelry box Cassius had bought her, filled with diamonds and pearls, symbols of his success. She slammed it shut, leaving it all behind. They were not gifts of love. They were payments for her compliance. When she emerged, Cassius was waiting by the door, his arms crossed, his face impatient. Sylvie was gone, likely waiting in a car downstairs, having done her part in the demolition. He didn't look at Aurelia. He simply opened the door. "The doorman will call you a cab," he said, his final words to her as his wife. She walked past him without a word, her head held high, the tears a hot track on her cold skin. As she stepped out into the hallway, the heavy door of the penthouse clicked shut behind her, the sound as definitive as a coffin being sealed. The storm had passed, leaving her stranded in the wreckage, alone in the deafening silence. As the elevator descended, taking her away from the life she knew, she clutched her belly, a silent vow echoing in the ruins of her heart. This was not the end. It was a brutal, devastating beginning. The city at night, usually a glittering tapestry of promise from the penthouse window, was now a hostile, indifferent maze. The taxi's meter ticked upwards, each click a mocking reminder of her new reality. Every dollar mattered now. She had Cassius's credit card in her wallet, but she knew it would be canceled by morning. The cash she had, a few $100s tucked away for emergencies, felt pitifully inadequate to face the world that had just been ripped out from under her. She had the driver take her to a small, unassuming hotel on the other side of town, a place so far removed from her previous life that it felt like another country. The room was small, the wallpaper was peeling slightly in one corner, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air. Aurelia sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the small suitcase at her feet, and the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the penthouse evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep despair. She was homeless, 7 months pregnant, and utterly alone. The friends she had were Cassius's friends, couples they socialized with, whose loyalty would undoubtedly lie with the millionaire, not his discarded wife. Her own family was a fractured memory. Her mother had passed away a few years ago, and her relationship with her father was non-existent. She had no one to call, no safety net to catch her. The isolation was a physical presence in the room, a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate her. The first night was a blur of tears. She wept for the husband she had lost long before he had thrown her out. She wept for the love she thought was real. She wept for the future that had been stolen from her and her child. The baby kicked, a strong, insistent reminder of the life that depended on her, and a new terrifying wave of panic washed over her. How could she protect this child? How could she provide for it? Cassius's promise of an adequate settlement felt like a threat, another tool of control. He would give her just enough to keep her quiet, just enough to ensure she was never a problem for him again. The next few days were spent in a daze. She barely ate, forcing down toast and tea from the hotel's sad little continental breakfast. She spent hours staring at the brick wall outside her window, her mind a frantic, replaying loop of the final, brutal scene in the penthouse. Sylvie's smug face, Cassius's cold eyes, the click of the closing door. Each memory was another turn of the knife. But slowly, through the thick fog of grief, something else began to stir. It was a flicker of anger, a tiny, resilient ember glowing in the ashes of her old life. It was the echo of her grandmother's voice, a voice she hadn't truly listened to in years. "The world will try to tell you who you are, little bird," she used to say, her hands smelling of soil and chamomile. "Don't you dare listen. You are not their story. You are your own." That anger was a lifeline. It was the first emotion other than pain that she had felt, and it was clarifying. It burned away the helplessness, replacing it with a fragile, nascent resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not be the tragic footnote in Cassius's success story. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, and she was a mother. Her child deserved more than a broken woman. On the third day, she left the hotel room. She walked the city streets, not aimlessly, but with a growing sense of purpose. She saw the world differently now, not from behind the tinted glass of a luxury car, but from the pavement. She saw the resilience of people, the quiet dignity of those who struggled, the small acts of kindness between strangers. It was a world Cassius had insulated her from, a world he looked down on from his glass tower. But it was a real world, and for the first time, she felt a part of it. Her first step was practical. She needed money, and she needed a plan. She sold the expensive watch Cassius had given her for her last birthday, one of the few items of value she had instinctively packed. The amount she received from the jeweler felt like a fortune. It was enough to rent a small apartment, to buy groceries, to breathe for a few months. She found a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a quiet working-class neighborhood. It was nothing like the penthouse. The floors creaked, the radiator hissed, and the sounds of the city, sirens, music, children playing, were a constant, lively presence. But it was hers. As she stood in the empty living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the dusty window, she felt a sense of ownership she had never felt in the cold, marble palace she had called home. This small, imperfect space was a blank canvas, and she was the artist. The call from Cassius's lawyer came a week later. The man was slick, his voice oozing a synthetic sympathy. He laid out the terms of the settlement. It was a one-time payment, conditional on her signing a non-disclosure agreement that would gag her for life. The amount was, as Cassius had promised, adequate if her plan was to live a small, quiet life on the margins. It was hush money. It was designed to make her go away. The Aurelia of 2 weeks ago would have taken it without question, grateful for the scraps from Cassius's table. But the woman holding the phone was different. The ember of anger had been fanned into a small, steady flame. "Tell Mr. Drake," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that I will be in contact with him through my own legal counsel." She hung up the phone before the lawyer could respond, a tremor of exhilaration running through her. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have a plan. But for the first time in a very long time, she had her own voice. She was no longer waiting for Cassius to decide her worth. The ashes of her old life were all around her, but she could feel the warmth of the embers, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she had the strength to build a new fire from them. Just as Aurelia was beginning to chart her new, uncertain future, a letter arrived. It was addressed in old-fashioned, looping cursive on thick, cream-colored stationery, a relic from another era. It was from a law firm in a small town she hadn't visited since she was a child, the town where her grandmother, Matilda, had lived out her reclusive life. Aurelia's heart pounded as she broke the wax seal. She had been named as the sole beneficiary of her grandmother's estate. She assumed it would be the house, perhaps a small savings account, enough to provide a little more security, a welcome cushion in her precarious new life. She made an appointment and took a train to the sleepy, picturesque town, the familiar landscape stirring a bittersweet nostalgia within her. The law office was on a cobblestone street, a brass plaque on the door that read, Crow and Rowan, Eston, 1923. Mr. Allister was an elderly man with kind, watery eyes and a gentle demeanor. He had been her grandmother's lawyer and friend for over 40 years. He spoke of Matilda with a deep, affectionate respect that warmed Aurelia's heart. He described her not as the eccentric recluse the family had painted her as, but as a brilliant, fiercely private woman with an astonishing mind. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Aurelia," he said, leaning forward in his leather chair. "She never forgave your grandfather for what he did, nor the rest of the family for siding with him." Aurelia looked at him, confused. "What he did? I was always told she just left, that she was unstable." Mr. Allister sighed, a sad, heavy sound. "That is the story your grandfather, a very powerful and proud man, wanted told. The truth is, your grandmother was an astute investor. She had an almost preternatural gift for seeing patterns in the market, for knowing which small, unknown companies would one day become giants. She started with a small inheritance of her own and began to build. Your grandfather saw her success not as something to celebrate, but as a threat to his own ego. He tried to take control of her portfolio. When she refused, he tried to have her declared incompetent. She fought him, and she won, but it cost her her family. So she created a new life for herself, a quiet life, where no man could ever control her or her fortune again." Aurelia sat in stunned silence, trying to process this revelation. The grandmother she remembered, the woman who gardened and baked and read poetry, was a financial genius who had been cast out for being too successful, too independent. "She watched you from a distance, you know," Mr. Allister continued softly. "She was proud of you, but she was worried. She saw you with Cassius. She told me once, he's just like his grandfather, a man who mistakes a woman's kindness for weakness. He'll try to put her light out so his can shine brighter." Tears welled in Aurelia's eyes. Her grandmother had seen it all. She had understood. Now, Mr. Allister said, clearing his throat and pushing a thick portfolio across the desk. To the estate, Matilda was frugal in her personal life, but her investments, well, they were not. She left everything to you, Aurelia, the house, the land, and the entire contents of her investment portfolio. He opened the portfolio. Aurelia's eyes scanned the pages of stocks, bonds, and assets. The numbers were bewildering, a dizzying array of commas and zeros. She saw names of tech companies she knew, pharmaceutical giants, and obscure startups. Her mind struggled to comprehend the scale of it. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice hoarse. What does this all mean? Mr. Allister gave her a small, gentle smile. It means, my dear, after all taxes and fees are settled, that your inheritance is valued at approximately $50 million. The words hung in the air of the quiet, dusty office. $50 million. Aurelia felt the room tilt, the sound of blood rushing in her ears. She gripped the arms of the chair to steady herself. It was an impossible number, a sum from a different universe. It was more money than Cassius had made in his first 10 years of business. She thought of Cassius in his penthouse, looking down on the world, so sure of his own power, so dismissive of her worthlessness. He had thrown her out with what he thought was nothing, branding her a dependent, a liability. And all this time, this incredible, life-altering secret lay dormant, waiting for her. Her grandmother hadn't just left her money. She had left her a weapon, a shield, a kingdom. She had left her independence. The shock slowly gave way to a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked her over. It was grief for the grandmother she never truly knew. It was anger at the family that had lied to her, and it was a profound, earth-shattering sense of vindication. She spent the rest of the day with Mr. Allister, who patiently walked her through the basics of the portfolio, recommending financial advisors and accountants. He handed her the keys to her grandmother's house, which she now owned. As she left his office, the late afternoon sun felt different on her skin. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She was no longer Aurelia, the discarded wife. She was Aurelia, the architect of her own destiny. She drove to her grandmother's house, a place she hadn't seen in 20 years. It was just as she remembered, a little wild, a little overgrown, but sturdy and welcoming. She walked through the rooms, touching the dusty furniture, running her hands over the spines of the thousands of books. In the study, she found her grandmother's journals. Page after page was filled with her elegant script, detailing not just her market predictions, but her thoughts on life, on freedom, on resilience. In the final entry, dated just a month before she passed, she had written a note to Aurelia. My dearest little bird, if you are reading this, then the world has finally let you see what I have always known, that you have wings. Do not let anyone ever convince you to live in a cage, no matter how gilded. The sky is yours. Fly. Clutching the journal to her chest, Aurelia wept. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of gratitude, of release, of a strength she was finally, fully, claiming as her own. The inheritance wasn't just the money, it was this legacy. It was the truth. It was the permission to fly. Cassius Drake thought he had destroyed her, but he had only succeeded in setting her free. And with a $50 million fortune at her back, she was about to build a new world from the ashes of the old. The discovery of the fortune did not send Aurelia on a spending spree. There was no revenge shopping, no fleet of luxury cars, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Her grandmother's journals, filled with wisdom about the corrosive nature of ego and the quiet power of understated strength, became her guide. The money was not a means to emulate Cassius's hollow lifestyle, but a tool to build something real, something with meaning. Her first move was an act of quiet defiance. She retained Mr. Allister and, on his recommendation, hired a formidable, top-tier divorce attorney from the city, a woman known for dismantling the egos of powerful men. When Cassius's lawyer received the letter of representation, it sent a ripple of shock through their camp. They had expected to deal with a frightened, desperate woman, not a legal heavyweight. Aurelia instructed her attorney to refuse the settlement. She didn't want his adequate hush money. She wanted only one thing from the divorce: her freedom. She asked for nothing, no alimony, no claim to his assets, simply a dissolution of the marriage. The move was strategically brilliant. It baffled Cassius, who couldn't comprehend why she would walk away from a potential payout. To his transactional mind, it was illogical. He didn't realize it was a declaration of independence, a statement that she no longer needed anything from him. With the legal battle in capable hands, Aurelia focused on creating a life for herself and her soon-to-be-born child. She sold her grandmother's house, knowing it was too large and isolated for a new mother. With a fraction of her inheritance, she purchased a beautiful, spacious brownstone in a family-friendly city neighborhood, one with parks and good schools. She poured her heart into making it a home, not with the help of an interior designer, but with her own two hands. She chose warm colors, comfortable furniture, and filled the shelves with books. She planted a garden in the small backyard, finding a deep grounding peace in the feel of soil under her fingernails, just as her grandmother had. The house became a sanctuary, a space that was entirely hers, filled with hope and the scent of baking bread instead of expensive perfume and silence. She also began to quietly, strategically invest, just as Matilda had. Guided by her grandmother's journals and a team of trusted advisors, she discovered she had a natural aptitude for it, a keen intuition she never knew she possessed. She didn't invest in the flashy, high-risk ventures Cassius favored. Instead, she put her money into sustainable energy, innovative healthcare startups, and educational technology, companies that were building a better future. Her wealth began to grow, but more importantly, it began to have a purpose. She established the Phoenix Rising Fund, dedicated to supporting women. It provided grants to female entrepreneurs, scholarships for young women in STEM, and funding for shelters for women and children fleeing abusive situations. Pouring her energy into the foundation was healing. She met women who had survived circumstances far worse than her own, women of incredible strength and resilience. Their stories put her own pain into perspective and ignited a passion within her. She was no longer just building a life for herself, but creating a legacy of empowerment. Meanwhile, Cassius's world was beginning to lose its luster. His partnership with Sylvie was not the seamless synergy he had imagined. Sylvie was as ambitious and ruthless as he was, but she lacked his experience and strategic foresight. Their relationship, born of corporate conquest and illicit excitement, began to curdle in the harsh light of domesticity. She was possessive, demanding, and constantly insecure about being compared to Aurelia, especially after the baffling news that Aurelia had refused a settlement. She pushed Cassius to be more aggressive in his business dealings, encouraging risky ventures that his more cautious instincts warned against. The Aegis deal, the one Sylvie had supposedly saved, turned out to be a Trojan horse, filled with unforeseen liabilities that began to drain the company's resources. The whispers started at the country club and in the boardrooms. Cassius Drake, the man with the golden touch, had lost his edge. His judgment seemed impaired, his focus scattered. His employees, who had once respected Aurelia for her quiet grace and kindness, resented Sylvie's abrasive management style. The loyalty Cassius commanded began to fray. The perfect life he had curated was showing its cracks. He would come home to the pristine penthouse, now feeling cold and empty, and find Sylvie complaining about a slight from a social rival or demanding a new, more extravagant piece of jewelry. The vibrant, challenging partner he thought he had chosen was revealing herself to be a shallow, grasping woman who loved his status more than the man himself. One evening, Cassius found himself staring at the empty space on his desk, where Aurelia's picture used to be. He remembered her calm presence, the way she could soothe his anxieties after a brutal day, her unwavering belief in him, even when he doubted himself. He had called her a passenger, but he was beginning to realize she had been his anchor, the steady, unseen force that had allowed his ship to sail so freely. He had thrown his anchor overboard in the middle of a storm, and now he was beginning to drift. Aurelia, on the other hand, was thriving. Just weeks before her due date, she hosted the first charity gala for the Phoenix Rising Fund. She stood before a crowd of influential people, her baby bump prominent under an elegant, simple dress, and spoke with a passion and confidence that captivated the room. She was no longer the timid, overshadowed wife. She was a leader, a philanthropist, a force in her own right. She radiated a serene, powerful beauty that came not from designer clothes or expensive jewels, but from a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. She had built a new world, not on the ashes of her old life, but from its embers. She had taken the pain of her betrayal and transformed it into purpose. And she had done it all without Cassius ever knowing the true source of her newfound strength. He saw her as a mystery, a woman who had somehow landed on her feet. He had no idea she had learned to fly. The birth of her son, whom she named Orion, was the final, definitive turning point for Aurelia. Holding him in her arms, so small and perfect, she felt a love so fierce and protective, it eclipsed everything else. All the lingering pain of Cassius's betrayal, all the bitterness, it all faded into insignificance. Her life wasn't about him anymore. It was about this new precious soul who depended on her completely. Her future, once a terrifying blank canvas, was now filled with purpose and a boundless, joyful love. In stark contrast, Cassius's life was in a freefall. The risky ventures Sylvie had championed turned into catastrophic failures. The Aegis deal was a financial black hole, and a subsequent, ill-advised acquisition led to a shareholder revolt. Cassius, once the darling of the financial world, became a cautionary tale. He was forced to sell off massive parts of his company, his personal fortune dwindling with alarming speed. The stress and failure created deep fissures in his relationship with Sylvie. Their fights became explosive, her accusations more venomous. She blamed him for his weakness. He blamed her for her recklessness. The passion that had once defined them curdled into a toxic resentment. The final blow came when a journalist, digging into Cassius's fall from grace, uncovered the story of the Phoenix Rising Fund. The article portrayed her as a symbol of resilience, a philanthropist making a real difference in the world, and painted a subtle but clear picture of Cassius as the cold-hearted millionaire who had cast out his pregnant wife. The story was a PR nightmare for him, but it was a small, innocuous detail at the end of the article that sent him reeling. It mentioned that the foundation had been established with a substantial inheritance Aurelia had received from her late grandmother. Inheritance? Cassius's mind raced. He had always known Aurelia's family was estranged from her grandmother. He'd assumed they were all people of modest means. He had built his narrative around the idea that he had lifted her from obscurity. The thought that she had access to her own money he knew nothing about, was a seismic shock to his ego. Driven by a desperate, obsessive curiosity, he hired a private investigator. He had to know. When the report came back, he read it in his cavernous, silent office. The city lights outside seeming to mock his dissent. The words blurred, the number so staggering it seemed like a typo. $50 million. Aurelia, the simple, unassuming woman he had deemed worthless, had been a secret heiress all along. The revelation broke him. It wasn't just about the money. It was the complete and utter demolition of his reality. His entire perception of her, of their marriage, of himself, had been a lie. He had thrown away a diamond, believing it was a stone. He saw his cruelty in a horrifying new light. He hadn't just been callous. He had been a fool, an arrogant, blind fool. His decision to leave her wasn't a powerful man trading up, but a colossal, life-altering blunder. His break with Sylvie was swift and ugly. With his fortune decimated, she saw no more use for him. She left, taking with her a trail of venomous parting words and a significant portion of what little he had left in a bitter settlement. Cassius was left alone in the sterile penthouse, a king in a bankrupt kingdom, haunted by the ghost of a life he had willfully destroyed. Weeks later, humbled and desperate, he showed up at Aurelia's brownstone. He stood on her doorstep, a man stripped of all his former arrogance. He looked older, tired, the sharp lines of his face softened by defeat. When Aurelia opened the door, holding Orion in her arms, he flinched. The sight of his son, healthy and happy in the arms of the woman he had wronged, was a physical blow. "Aurelia," he began, his voice hoarse, "can I talk to you?" She regarded him with a calm, unreadable expression and stepped aside, allowing him into the warmth of her home. The house was filled with light, with the smell of baby powder and fresh flowers. It was everything his penthouse was not. He stumbled through a broken, rambling apology. He told her he had been a fool, that he was wrong, that leaving her was the greatest regret of his life. He told her he knew about the inheritance, framing it not as the reason for his return, But as the event that made him realize the universe was teaching him a lesson, I see it all so clearly now, he pleaded, his eyes filled with a desperate, calculated sincerity. We can have it all back, Aurelia. You, me, and our son. A real family. We can combine our resources. We can be a true power couple. Better than before? Aurelia listened patiently, her expression never changing. She gently rocked Orion, who was beginning to fuss. The man before her was a stranger. The Cassius she had loved was a memory. The Cassius who had hurt her was a ghost. This man was a pathetic, broken creature, trying to piece his life back together using the only tools he knew: manipulation and transaction. He wasn't apologizing for the pain he caused. He was pitching a merger. When he finally fell silent, the hope in his eyes dying as he looked at her impassive face, she spoke. Her voice was not angry, not bitter. It was calm, clear, and final. There is no we, Cassius, she said softly. You destroyed that. You didn't come here because you love me. You came here because you are ruined, and you see me as your last, best investment. You see my inheritance as a lifeline. But my grandmother's legacy, this home, my son, they are not for you. They are not assets to be leveraged. She adjusted Orion in her arms, turning him so Cassius could see his face for the first time. The baby had his father's dark eyes. This is your son, she said, her voice softening with love for the child. His name is Orion. You may, if he chooses when he is older, be a part of his life, but you will never again be a part of mine. The finality in her voice was absolute. There was no room for negotiation. This was not a business deal. This was a reckoning. It was the quiet, definitive closing of a door he could never reopen. He looked from her strong, serene face to the innocent child in her arms and finally, truly, understood the magnitude of what he had lost. It wasn't just the money. It was a life. It was a family. It was a love he had been too blind to see and too arrogant to value. He had nothing left to offer and nothing left to say. The reckoning was complete. Cassius left her brownstone, a diminished man, the last of his blustering self-assurance extinguished by the quiet, unshakable dignity of the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated. Aurelia watched him go from the window, his slumped shoulders a testament to his defeat. She felt no triumph, no surge of vengeful satisfaction. There was only a profound sense of closure, the final page turning on a long and painful chapter of her life. She turned from the window, kissed Orion's forehead, and felt nothing but peace. The years that followed were filled not with drama or conflict, but with the beautiful, ordinary rhythm of a life well lived. Aurelia raised Orion in a home filled with love, laughter, and books. She taught him kindness, resilience, and the importance of integrity. Lessons learned from her grandmother and forged in the fire of her own experience. She ran the Phoenix Rising Fund with a compassionate and savvy hand, its impact growing year after year, changing the lives of countless women. She continued to invest wisely, her fortune growing not for the sake of accumulation, but for the good it could do in the world. She never remarried, not because she was afraid of love, but because she had found a deep and abiding fulfillment in the life she had built for herself. Her world was rich with deep friendships, meaningful work, and the all-encompassing joy of motherhood. She had found a love that was unconditional and a strength that was entirely her own. She was no longer a reflection of a man's success. She was the source of her own light. Cassius, true to her word, was allowed to be a part of Orion's life, but on her terms. He was a visitor, a weekend father who slowly and awkwardly learned how to connect with his son. Through his relationship with Orion, he began to see the world differently. He saw the value in things that couldn't be bought or sold: a child's trust, a shared laugh, a quiet moment of connection. He eventually rebuilt a small measure of his career, but he was a changed man, humbled and haunted by the spectacular failure of his own character. He saw Aurelia from a distance, a woman of grace and power, and knew with a permanent, aching certainty that his greatest loss had nothing to do with money. One crisp autumn morning, Aurelia sat on a park bench, watching a now 10-year-old Orion play soccer with his friends. The sun was warm on her face, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. She felt a deep sense of contentment, a quiet joy that was the culmination of her long journey. She had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not scorched, but purified. She had taken the ashes of a life that was burned to the ground and built a vibrant, thriving world. Her grandmother's last words echoed in her mind. The sky is yours. Fly. And she had. She had soared higher than she had ever imagined possible. The story of the millionaire and his discarded wife became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and at charity galas. But for Aurelia, it was simply her life, a life of unexpected turns, of profound pain, and of even more profound strength. A life that proved that a person's worth is not determined by who they are with or what they have, but by the strength of their own character and the fire they keep alive within their soul. As she watched her son score a goal, his face alight with pure joy, she smiled. Her journey had been a difficult one, a tempest of loss and discovery. She had been cast out, left with nothing, and had risen from the ashes to build a life of purpose and peace on her own terms. Her story was a testament to the quiet, formidable power that can lie dormant, waiting for the storm to awaken it. Now, looking at the life she built, the legacy she was creating, and the son she adored, one has to wonder, if you were in her place, faced with the man who broke you, who came begging for a second chance only after he discovered your worth, what would you have done?